As I was reading through the most interesting book of all times, written by some dude, I was thinking about how many matches I've burned through. Now, according to the Great Perfect formula, I've calculated that about 97.3% of you guys think that I'm talking about my Tinder matches. And even though I've dated some of the hottest chicks of my town, I'm actually talking about real matches. You know, the other hot ones. Now, even though that matches are really great for the cozy lights and their portability, they also have a couple of downsides. First of all, fire means heat, and that also means that you can burn your fingers. The second thing that I dislike is the amount of waste that I create after reading a couple of pages in my book. Also, trying to wipe your behind with blisters on your fingers like these is not much fun, even though it's an interesting experience. And lastly, burning matches also create smoke. And if I recall correctly, this ceiling used to be completely white, so this begs for a different solution. Time to get rid of the old way and release the designer in release the designer in me. Old junk aside and my professional design gear in place. Okay, so the idea is to create some kind of a super match with a very strong light source and an unlimited amount of energy. As I was scanning the internet for a nice and radiant light source, I came across nuclear energy. So I picked up the phone and called the supplier, explained him the idea and asked him for a good pricing. I quickly realized that this was a little bit above my budget, so my supplier asked me, "Why you don't use light bulb like every normal person?" So funny, I've never thought about that. Now that I had the right info about the light source, I could finalize the technical package in a nice technical drawing. At the very bottom there will be some kind of power source, followed by quite a long piece of wood, on which I will mount a light bulb, and then this is being topped off by some sort of plastic cover. For the cover, I'm thinking about a technique called blow molding. And no, you perverts, this is not what you think. This technique means that you put a hot piece of plastic in a mold, which you then inject with air so it takes the shape of the mold. To build such a mold, I would at least need something that resembles one half of the cover I will be using. I could look in my basement, but that would be like finding a 3D printed cover in a haystack. Since the blow molded piece is going to copy every detail of the mold, I need to smoothen out the surfaces of this totally randomly found piece of plastic. To do this, I pretend to be a professional bodywork artisan with years of hands-on experience. I found that this approach always gives me the best results. After a couple of layers of filler and some sanding, it started to look like an oiled up butt of an unborn baby, the smoothest kind on the market. Now that the shape is ready, I only need to build a box around it to pour in the concrete. And as you will see, I did this in a couple of swift moves, like a box building ninja with 2 black belts. With this homemade superglue, I firmly attach the shape to the box so it won't start floating when I pour in the concrete. To mount everything together, I'm using screws so I can easily open up the mold to make the second half. You can use nails, but then you will be screwed when you want to open the mold again. Time to lubricate the mold. For this I'm relying on my best friend, olive oil, which I only use for cooking, of course. Now that the mold is completely lubed up with oil, I can start to prepare the cement mix to pour into the mold. When the mold was partially filled up, I used a drill with a hammer setting on a block of wood to liquefy the concrete. If you use this technique, make sure to stop drilling before the concrete starts to enjoy itself a little bit too much. After 2 days of drying, it was time to open the mold and have a look at the masterpiece that I created. However, once I removed the side panels, it became clear that this guy wasn't planning on letting go of the back part. So I've tried tapping it, I've tried threading it with a machete, I've tried caressing it gently, and I even tried to bribe it with a 20. In the end, it took me 40 hours of negotiation for it to let go, and the results were rather disappointing. It appeared that the concrete was still sticking to the lamp cover shapey thingy, so this meant that I had to rely on my other and even better friend, Mr. Vaseline, as a mold release agent. Since the old block looked like it had severe acne in its youth, and this will remain visible in the final product, I'm using a vacuum pump to release all the air and hopefully get rid of all the air pockets. I really hope that this is a good strategy, and I cross my fingers for it to work. A couple of days later, when I opened the mold, it seemed that I was in for another treat, but at the end I knew I could rely on my trustworthy friend Vaseline. The visible part of the light cover was smooth as a criminal, and tears of joy filled the basement with water. This meant that for the second half of the mold I could just repeat process and live happily ever after. Now that the molds are all set, it is time to start working on the wooden stick. For this I looked around in my basement, and when I pulled away this bag of cement, to my utter surprise I found this very old piece of wood. At least that's what the label claimed. And as with every very old piece of wood, I always give it a good sniff, and if the smell is good, I test it for crunchiness. Now I just need to cut 4 strokes of the same width and a 45-degree miter to form the stick. I couldn't quite place it when I was tasting it, but it appears that this wood comes from the banana tree based on how it warps. Had I known this in advance, I would have surely accidentally found a different piece of wood in my basement. Anyway, enough with the complaining, time to work on the power source. For this I purchased this battery pack that I will be redesigning to better fit my needs. The warning label clearly states that I should not disassemble or deform the battery, so I carefully neglected this information and removed the plastic shrink sleeve. Now I understood why it should not be opened. The artisan probably wouldn't want to give away its secret in this beautiful design of the battery pack. The battery pack didn't fit the design I had in mind, so I had to rearrange the cells so that it would fit in the wooden stick. So after I drew up the new schematics of the battery pack, I did some soldering, some professional taping, some more soldering, a little bit of shrink sleeving, to end up with a Franken battery that seems to do the job just fine. Having done the electrical part, it is time to mount together the stick. For this I used some blocks of wood to form the skeleton that helped me straighten out this wood that bends more than a Japanese dude saying hello to his boss. I stick the capacitive sensor to the sidewall and added some wiring to feed the light bulb with juice. A couple of squirts with the hot glue gun did the trick of holding the wires in place just perfectly. Against all odds, I must say that I nailed this part of the build pretty good. With all the internal components in place, I can top off the stick with the final piece of wood. Now that we have the stick sorted out, we can move on with the production of the top cover. The idea is to heat up some bottles and blow them into the shape of the mold with compressed air. I prepped a couple of bottles by drilling a hole in the cap. I whacked them in the oven and I tried to blow them up with the compressed air. It appeared I made a bottle gun instead of a blow molding machine, as the pressure needed was too high to inflate the bottles. Even when exposing the bottles directly to an open flame, it did little to no good. So I ended up with an unused concrete mold, a couple of bottles that resemble the reproductive organs of my grandfather, and a bucket full of tears. Lucky for me, Easter was just around the corner, and as I was looking for my eggs, I discovered that the Easter Bunny had left me a special egg that might fit the design I intended. To close up the bottom, I looked on the internet for bottom closing plugs. However, the ones I found seem only to work for round holes and had the weirdest shapes. This means I had to manufacture my own plug with a 2-component rubber. The rubber plug will serve two purposes. One is to keep the battery from falling out of the bottom, and the other one is to ensure that the match won't become slippery when placed in a slanted position. After building the mold for the plug, I mixed together the two components of the rubber, I degassed it, poured it in the mold and let it set overnight. The very next day the rubber was cured, and when I snapped my fingers, nothing happened. This means I manually had to remove the mold. After a bit of trimming with a sharp knife, the plug was fitting like a plug and I could move on to the next job. To indicate the position of the capacitive light switch, I designed and printed out an icon to make a template. I printed out a bunch of them in case I would make a mistake. However, this gave me a headache as I didn't know which one I liked the most. After cutting out the template, I applied the silver colored oil with a cloth and removed the template so it could dry. The very next day I applied a coat of vanilla colored oil to protect the rest of the wood, and I picked vanilla because I like vanilla ice cream. When the oil was completely dry, I could start with the assembly of all the components. I connected the Franken battery and shoved it in the bottom to cap it off with my homemade bottom plug. Then I installed the light bulb and topped it off with the special egg I received from the Easter Bunny. So there you have it, an electronic match that matches the shape and proportions of a real match with a hidden capacitive switch that is indicated with the icon of a burning match. Let's hope it matches my interior. Now that everything is done, I just have to replace this reading lamp in the corner with my super match, and now I can read my books with a perfect lighting. If you have enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed scratching my back, then please give it a like and I will smell you in the next one.